This took place a few years ago when I used to live on a farm. My stepmom was always fascinated with the idea of living off the land, growing our own food and raising animals. After several failed attempts, we finally found a nice house on a piece of land with an established asparagus farm, and shortly after we settled in, we brought some animals to the farm like chickens, ducks, and a few rabbits. We let the chickens and ducks roam freely around the property, and for a while everything was fine. They seemed to enjoy exploring the farm, and we didn't have any problems with it. But after raising our last batch of ducklings, something strange happened. 2 of our 4 adult ducks disappeared without a trace. There were no feathers, no signs of a struggle, just gone as if they had vanished into thin air. Even though we live in the countryside, we could still see our neighbors, and at the very back of our property there was a creek that connected to the state river. So for a while we thought the ducks might have just wandered off, but one evening as it started to rain, we rushed outside to make sure all the animals were safely in their shelters. As we were checking on the animals, my stepmom and I heard a duck in the woods. We ran across the property about an acre or so to see if it was our missing ducks. My dad and brother followed us with guns to help search the woods. While we looked along the tree line, they went off toward the creek and told me to whistle if I spotted anything. I headed up the side of the property, checking behind the old barn to see if I could find any signs of the ducks. The area was quiet and the woods felt a bit creepy in the fading light. As I made my way back to where we had split up, my stepmom came out of the woods looking concerned. Just so you know, the creek at the back of our property split off into a small stream that ran up along the side of the land, making it easy for animals to wander off without us noticing. As we were facing the stream, we heard several whistles coming from the woods in front of us. We thought it was my brother, so we started looking for him, trying not to scare any ducks that might be nearby. After about 30 seconds, my dad and brother came running out of the woods from the opposite direction, asking why we were whistling. My stepmom and I were confused and said it wasn't us. We told my dad and brother that we thought the whistling was coming from my brother. We all agreed that none of us had done it and that we were with other people who could confirm where we were. Just to clarify, the whistling came from right in front of us, but there was no sign of anyone there. We didn't see any MOV movement or hear any other sounds, only the whistling, which happened several times. A similar story happened about a week after the whistling incident. I wasn't there, but my brother and sister were. It was around 8 at night, but since it was summer, it was still light outside. A bad storm was approaching, and my brother and sister were watching the sky get darker and turn gray. They looked toward the back of our yard about an acre away and saw a man crouched down dressed in all white. My brother, being who he is, fired a shot toward the sky after telling him to leave several times, and then watched him run away. My sister said she saw the man standing behind the fence post before my brother noticed him. She only told my brother about it when the man moved, and she could clearly see that it was a person. After talking to my sister more about what really happened, she said the man had an unusual glow around him, which is why they noticed him in the dark woods. I'm not sure if this story is connected to the whistling, but my parents definitely didn't want us going into the woods anymore. I got married when I was 19, and my husband and I had no clue what to do with our new life together. We dropped out of college and our studio apartment was too expensive. We thought it was the ideal time to travel and have adventures. Before settling down, we came across a post on the internet from a man who was looking for workers on his horse ranch. We would provide all meals and lodging in exchange for labor around the ranch. It looked like just a solution for us. He claimed to be very knowledgeable in trades and would teach us how to build machinery, woodworking and welding. We actually did learn to weld, which is pretty cool. The pictures were beautiful. The log cabin he built was huge, and he would have a nice big bedroom for us. There were lots of other people in the photos, and in our correspondence with him he always mentioned other people and referred himself to as we. He advertises on multiple platforms, and everything looks really legit. We booked our flight. There was nobody else there. He was in his 60s, but mentally and physically very fit. One of the first things he said to us was, "I never judge people based on their past. Do you believe people can change?" I sure do. Seemed harmless enough. He took us grocery shopping and told us to pick whatever we wanted, but we kind of immediately got to 5 that his kindness was forced and that he was being over generous. I'm going to get right into listing the weird stuff that we noticed. He built a house himself, and his bedroom had a door to the only upstairs bathroom, which didn't lock from the inside. He would invite us into his room, and on his table was an old video camera with about 30 little tapes strewn about. He would always talk about how much he loved the Japanese, how he specifically marketed toward them and had a few Japanese ladies stay in the past. He often brought up people who had stayed with him before, and all of them had left suddenly and maybe unexpectedly. But one day he told us to get in the truck because we were going to the city. We were way out in the country, so it was a long ride, but he was really excited about going. He asked us to walk around and to ask young people to come with us and work on the ranch, but this made us super uncomfortable. We are introverts, and I just felt very odd to approach people and ask them to get in the truck. However, he got upset by our disapproval, so we got out and pretended to look for people to talk to. He went to talk to people on his own. As well as the days went on, his welcoming nature began to give way to a very temperamental and aggressive one. I didn't really find him creepy, but intolerable. I didn't like him at all. He seemed extremely socially inept and said inappropriate things. It was also extremely apparent that he did not view women as equal or anywhere near equal to men. He had military training and was a big strong man, cunning, always thinking. Now, our parents never wanted us to go. They realized it to be a potentially dangerous situation, but we thought we had done our due diligence. However, we never even thought to Google this guy's name. I get an email from my mom one day freaking out and telling me to do a Google search, then get on the next plane home. A quick search showed me his arrest record: strangling and sexually assaulting a young woman, followed by headlines reading, "Do not go to this ranch. This man is dangerous." At this point, we were thoroughly creeped out, and we booked a flight home. We were then presented with a dilemma of how to tell a potentially dangerous man that we wanted to leave. I forgot to mention that he would tell us daily about how we could live there permanently and start a family. He would fantasize about Christmases with our future children and raising them on the ranch, but we thought it was established that this was a very temporary thing, and we had families back home who missed us. This was the weirdest part for me. I made up a lie about an emergency back home, and when I told him, it was like he could see right through me. I'm convinced that not only he knew I was lying, but he knew I was going to lie about needing to leave before I even opened my mouth. This look came over him that I have never seen on a person before. He was angry, but trying to hide it. He was hiding so many thoughts and emotions that I couldn't tell if I should be frightened or relieved. Before I finished my sentence, he said, "When do you need to go to the airport?" All monotone, I told him right now. And he actually took us and put on his friendliest personality and told us that if we ever wanted to come back, he would buy our tickets. We said we would be in touch. Just recently, I Googled his name again and discovered a page and a forum for people had gone to his ranch, mostly couples like us with eerily similar experiences. They spoke about how he says not to judge people on their past, the grocery store, the bathroom, and how they heard him listening behind his door during their midnight bathroom trips, and the videotapes and how they watched them. and saw young Japanese girls flexing their arms looking through his search history and seeing nothing but Japanese pornography. They spoke about being driven to the city and asked to jump out when thin young ladies walked by and tell them to come back to the ranch. I could go on and on. He is still operational. This forum, I found, was aimed at gathering stories and preventing future visitors to the ranch. The police do not have enough evidence to convict him of anything. I know I left a lot of creepy details out. I didn't want this to be too long, and I'm not really a great storyteller. I'm unsure whether it would be appropriate to name the man or the ranch, but the blog where all the others have written about their encounters is probably much creepier than my story. We got away with much less weirdness, because I don't believe I was his type, so to say, and he may have feared my husband. If anyone is interested, I may be able to give a few hints. So it can be. About 5 years ago, when I was around 26, I decided to travel the world. I had just finished college, which left me with debt and struggling to find any job, even ones I was overqualified for. I was feeling depressed and lonely in my small town in Washington. To escape, I decided to travel. A friend from high school suggested that I try woofing and volunteering to travel cheaply, so I gave it a shot. The way it works is pretty simple. You work about 25 hours a week on a farm, and in return you get food and a place to stay. The cool thing is that there's a big community of travelers doing the same thing, so it's easy to make new friends. You'll be surrounded by people from different backgrounds, and it's a great chance to step out of your comfort zone as you work and explore new places. You also get the time and space to think about your life and figure things out while experiencing something completely different. 8 months later, I had become an expert at shoveling cow manure. I started in Washington, then moved to Oregon, and finally went down to California. In California, I managed to save some extra money by doing side jobs for cash, and with that money, I had to decide where to go next. The thrill of being able to buy a ticket to almost anywhere in the world was overwhelming. Following the advice of my free-spirited volunteering partner, I picked a destination at random. I went to a randomizer website and clicked on the country button. It chose Georgia. I had almost no idea where it was or what it was like, but that made it even more exciting and adventurous. The thought of going somewhere so unknown really appealed to me, so I decided to go for it. I bought a ticket and started searching online for a farm in Georgia that could host me while I was there, but there weren't many options, and most of the farms were in remote areas without even an internet connection, even though I sent messages to all of them, as I knew only a few would reply. One farm did respond, and it was on top of a mountain. The pictures showed a traditional Georgian stone house with a big garden in the back, a family with happy children, grandparents eating dinner, and animals around the yard. The farm seemed nice and welcoming. The description was written in good English and the work requirements sounded reasonable, so I was excited. After I flew into Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, I followed the directions they sent to find the farm, but it wasn't easy. Few people in Georgia speak English. The roads are in bad shape since many haven't been fixed since the Soviet Union fell. It took me about 20 hours of riding old Soviet buses and taxis, traveling on winding roads and rough paths to reach the blue pin on my map. The path was a dirt road leading up a steep hill into a national park in the northern part of the country. There was nothing around for miles, just trees and silence. As I climbed the hill, I finally saw the house about half a mile away on an even steeper hill, surrounded by trees. From where I stood, it looked abandoned. The place looked overgrown, brown and gloomy. When I walked past the gate, a man named Geary, not his real name, came up to greet me. He was a short, heavy-set, middle-aged guy with a big smile and a friendly demeanor. He shook my hand and started showing me around in broken English. As he led me through the property, I noticed there was no one else around, just the two of us in the middle of the quiet, empty surroundings. I asked about his wife and kids, but he brushed it off and said something like they're away right now. At this point I started to feel uneasy. As I looked around, it was clear that the farm was in bad shape. Apple trees and crops were dying, the roof of the small barn had caved in, and the house was full of trash and smelled like mold. It was clear that Gary was having a tough time, but I wasn't ready to just turn around and leave in the middle of nowhere without any plans. And especially after not sleeping for the past 36 hours. Also, it was evening, and after Gary gave me a good meal and tried his best to chat with me in English, he showed me to my room on the second floor, and I went to sleep. I was so exhausted and stressed that I fell asleep almost immediately. I would have slept for 10 hours if I hadn't been woken up by a strange noise in the middle of the night. It sounded like something heavy and metallic was being dragged across the wooden floor, making a dragging sound that echoed through the quiet house. In my groggy, half-asleep state, I listened to the noise for a few minutes, trying to figure out what it was. After a while, when the noise stopped, I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. In the morning, Gary, now sober but looking grumpy, asked me to fix some of the windows and doors in the house while he went to a nearby village to get some parts. One started feeling uneasy again. Something didn't feel right. He avoided making eye contact and was vague about his plans. The lack of cell reception and internet made me feel even more isolated and unsure. Once Gary was gone, I started looking around the house to get a sense of the place. It became clear that it was barely lived in, and it felt like one of those abandoned houses. There was broken furniture, old newspapers, old photos scattered on the floor, and a shattered mirror. I took out my phone and checked the listing again. The photos didn't match the backyard, garden, or walls of the house I was in. Gary wasn't in any of them, and it felt like a completely different house. At this point, I'm in full-blown panic. I pack my things and start to leave when I noticed 3 men walking up the first hill with no other paths available. I decide to go behind the house and scramble down the steep hill into the forest. Once I feel a bit safer, I stop and listen carefully. I can hear the men inside the house, and they're clearly looking for me. Terrified of making any noise, I crouch down and hide behind a thick bush, trying to stay as still as possible. I don't know how long I wait, but their voices and footsteps keep getting closer and more persistent. At some point, I hear the men leave. I count to a large number to make sure they're gone, and then head back to the house and the path. Once I find it's all clear, I get out of there. I've never run so fast, but I'm still in the middle of nowhere with no cars or public transport. Then I finally reach a paved road and start walking in the direction I remember coming from. Hours pass, and finally a car drives by and stops. Now, if it was a horror movie, this would have been Gary and his friends, but it turns out to be a really nice family who gives me a ride to town. The listing for the farm disappeared from the website a few days after I left, and I haven't heard from Gary since. And when people hear this story, some laugh, and his friends were probably just coming over for a chat.